My name is Herman Walsh, 35 years old and founder of Next Gen Solutions. I was in Tokyo closing a seven-figure deal when my phone buzzed. An email from my parents. They had sold my Malibu villa, my sanctuary, to pay off my sister Natalie's gambling debts. The message ended with, "You didn't need it anyway, right?" I stared at my screen feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The property I'd worked my entire life for gone with a single keystroke. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. This story might help you heal. I grew up in Portland, in what most would call a typical middle-class family. My father, Frank, worked as an accountant, while my mother, Diane, taught second grade at the local elementary school. We weren't rich, but we had enough. At least that's what I thought until I started noticing the stark difference in how my parents treated me versus my younger sister, Natalie. Natalie was 4 years younger and could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When she wanted dance lessons, they found the money. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, they took out a loan. Meanwhile, I delivered newspapers at 12 bus tables at 16 and worked night shifts at a gas station throughout high school to save for college. "Herman, you're more independent," my mother would say whenever I pointed out the discrepancy. "Natalie needs more support." By 18, I had accepted that I was on my own. I got accepted to Oregon State with a partial scholarship for computer science and worked 3 part-time jobs to cover the rest. I lived off ramen and shared a tiny apartment with 3 other guys. Some nights I'd fall asleep at my laptop, exhausted, but determined to graduate with honors. During my junior year, I developed a rudimentary program that helped small businesses manage inventory more efficiently. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was solid enough that one of my professors encouraged me to pursue it after graduation. That encouragement was more support than I'd ever gotten from my family. When I graduated at 22, my parents attended the ceremony but left early because Natalie had a volleyball tournament. They didn't even stay for the reception where I was awarded the department's Innovation Prize. After college, I worked 80-hour weeks at a tech firm while developing my own software on the side. At 25, I quit my job and launched my startup Next Gen Solutions. The first 2 years were brutal. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet, ate 1 meal a day, and poured every cent into the business. Investors weren't interested initially. "Your concept is too niche," they said. But I knew there was a market for streamlined business intelligence software that smaller companies could actually afford. The breakthrough came when I was 28. I developed an algorithm that could predict inventory needs with 97% accuracy, using minimal data points. Suddenly, investors were calling me. Within 6 months, NextGen was valued at $15 million. My first major purchase was the Malibu villa. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything I'd accomplished without help. The 3-bedroom property sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the boundary between indoor and outdoor living nearly invisible. The moment I walked through the door, I knew it was home. That's when my relationship with my parents began to shift. Suddenly, they were calling regularly, mentioning financial struggles, hinting at needs. They visited my villa and commented on how lucky I was, as if luck rather than thousands of hours of hard work had built my success. Natalie had graduated with a business degree from a private college, fully paid by my parents, but struggled to hold down jobs. At first, she blamed bad bosses or toxic workplaces. Eventually, the truth emerged. She had developed a gambling problem during college. It started with poker nights in dorm rooms, escalated to online betting, and by her mid-20s, she was frequenting casinos in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. My parents always bailed her out, emptying their retirement savings and taking second mortgages on their house. When they finally ran out of resources, they turned to me. The first time they asked for $50,000 to help Natalie, I agreed on one condition: she needed to enter a rehabilitation program. She went for 2 weeks, then checked herself out. The money disappeared anyway. The second time, I offered to pay for an intensive 6-month program and living expenses, but wouldn't give cash directly. My parents were furious, accusing me of being controlling and heartless. "She needs understanding, not judgment," my father yelled over the phone. "No, she needs actual help," I replied. "You're enabling her addiction." That conversation ended our relationship for nearly a year. When we eventually reconnected, we maintained a surface-level cordiality, but never discussed Natalie or money. Meanwhile, my business continued to expand. By 35, NextGen had offices in 6 countries and was valued at over $200 million. Our latest expansion targeted the Asian market, which is why I was in Tokyo that fateful week negotiating partnerships with Japanese tech firms. I'd been gone for just 10 days when the email arrived that would change everything. The Tokyo skyline glittered outside my hotel window as I loosened my tie, riding the high of a successful meeting with potential Japanese investors. My proposal had been received enthusiastically, and we were on track to open our Tokyo office within 6 months. I ordered room service, poured myself a celebratory whiskey, and opened my laptop to check emails before calling it a night. That's when I saw it. Subject line about the house. Sender dwalsh65@gmail.com, my mother's email. I opened it, expecting perhaps a question about where I kept the spare key or when I'd be back. Instead, I read, Herman, your father and I wanted to let you know that we've sold your beach house in Malibu. We know this might come as a surprise, but Natalie got in over her head with some dangerous people. They were threatening her, and we had no choice. The money has been transferred to your account minus what was needed to clear her debts. You have 3 other properties, and you're hardly ever at this one anyway, right? Family needs to stick together in times of crisis, and this was the only solution. We're sure you'll understand once you've had time to think about it. Natalie is safe now, and that's what matters. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it once, twice, 3 times, my brain refusing to process the words. They had sold my house, without permission, without even a phone call. I immediately checked my online banking. Sure enough, there was a new deposit of $1,800,000. The villa was worth at least $3 million, probably more in the current market. My hands shook as I composed a reply, deleted it, composed another. Nothing seemed adequate to address the magnitude of what they had done. Instead, I opened a new tab and searched for real estate transactions in Malibu. There it was, my address listed as sold 3 days ago for $2,500,000 to Coastal Investments LLC. They had pocketed $700,000 of my money on top of stealing my property. I called my mother. No answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. I left messages, for both my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Then came another email, this time from my father. Son, I know you're upset, but please understand we had no choice. Natalie owed money to people who don't mess around. We tried to contact you first, but you were in meetings. We used the spare key you gave us for emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. The buyer wanted to close quickly, and we couldn't risk losing the deal. Call us when you've calmed down. My emergency spare key. The one I'd given them with explicit instructions to use only if I was unreachable and there was a genuine emergency like a fire or burst pipe, not to sell my property without consent. My stomach lurched and I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. After splashing cold water on my face, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the pale, shocked man staring back. The villa wasn't just a house. It was where I'd proposed to Elise 2 years ago, on the deck at sunset. Though we'd broken up 6 months later, the memory wasn't tainted. It was where I'd recovered after working myself to the point of hospitalization with pneumonia last year. Where I'd written the business plan that had just secured potential 8-figure investments in Tokyo. Every significant milestone in my adult life was somehow tied to that place. The infinity pool where I'd celebrated signing my first $1 million client. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook after years of takeout and microwave meals. The master bedroom with windows that let me fall asleep to the sound of waves crashing below. I sank onto the edge of the bathtub, head in my hands, trying to calculate the loss. The property itself, $3,200,000 at minimum based on recent comparable sales. The custom furnishings I'd selected piece by piece, another $300,000. The wine cellar stocked with rare vintages, $85,000. The art collection featuring emerging West Coast artists, $120,000. Beyond the financial loss was something that couldn't be quantified, the violation of trust, the breathtaking entitlement, the utter disregard for boundaries. I pulled myself together enough to call Derek Miller, my friend since college, and now a corporate attorney with expertise in real estate law. They did. What was his response after I explained the situation? Can they even do that legally? I asked. Absolutely not, Derek said firmly. That's grand theft fraud, and about 6 other felonies I can think of offhand. How did they even manage the paperwork? That was the question that kept me up all night. As dawn broke over Tokyo, I made my decision. I called my assistant, booked the first flight back to Los Angeles, and sent a single text to both my parents. What you've done is illegal. Do not contact me except through my attorney. Then I called the Malibu Police Department and reported the theft of my property. The 14-hour flight from Tokyo to Los Angeles was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, couldn't even watch movies to distract myself. Instead, I stared at the seatback screen, tracking our painfully slow progress across the Pacific, my mind racing through every possible scenario and legal option. Derek was waiting for me at LAX, his usually relaxed demeanor replaced by grim determination. We headed straight to his car, where he had a folder of preliminary documents ready. I've been doing some digging, he said as we pulled away from the curb. The sale was pushed through unusually fast. The escrow period was just 48 hours, which is practically unheard of for a property of this value. How did they even sign the paperwork? I asked, rubbing my temples. I never gave them power of attorney. Derek's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. They used a power of attorney document you apparently signed 7 years ago when you were having that emergency appendectomy. The memory clicked into place. I'd been rushed to surgery, and my parents had insisted I sign medical power of attorney forms. I'd been in too much pain to read the fine print or question why they'd brought their own notary friend to the hospital. Are you saying they've been holding on to a legal document for 7 years waiting to use it? Derek shook his head. The medical power of attorney would have expired, but they may have had you sign multiple documents, including a durable power of attorney that doesn't expire unless revoked. My stomach twisted with fresh betrayal. So they committed fraud 7 years ago in preparation for committing grand theft now. Essentially, yes. Which is why our first stop is the Malibu Sheriff's Station to formalize your police report. Detective Johnson was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I explained the situation, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. You understand that by filing this report you're potentially setting in motion criminal charges against your parents? She asked, studying my face. I understand completely, I replied without hesitation. She nodded. We'll investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, I recommend you pursue civil action to try to void the sale. Real estate fraud of this nature is both a criminal and civil matter. As we left the station, my phone exploded with notifications. 8 missed calls from my mother, 5 from my father, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail from my mother was tearful. Herman, please call us back. We need to explain. You don't understand the danger Natalie was in. The second was defensive. You're overreacting. We're your parents. Everything we've ever done was for this family. By the 5th message, her tone had shifted to anger. How dare you report us to the police? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By trying to send your own parents to jail. My father's messages followed a similar progression from placating to threatening, ending with, if you don't drop this right now, you'll regret it. Family matters should stay in the family. One of the unknown numbers turned out to be my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia. Herman, it's your Aunt Patty. Your mother is distraught. They were just trying to protect Natalie. These weren't ordinary creditors. These were dangerous people making threats. Please try to understand and call your parents. Another unknown caller was my father's golf buddy Martin, who had apparently been enlisted to pressure me. Son, your father tells me you're having a family disagreement. Whatever it is, I'm sure it can be worked out. Family is everything. Derek and I spent the rest of the day setting up meetings with real estate attorneys and forensic accountants, trying to track the money trail and identify Coastal Investments LLC. Preliminary searches show it's a shell company registered in Delaware. Derek explained over late-night takeout in his office. The beneficial owner is hidden behind several layers of corporate veils. It'll take time to unravel. As we worked, my Uncle Frank, my father's brother and the only family member I still respected, called with information he thought I should know. Herman, I don't agree with what my brother did, but there's more to this story, he said gravely. Your parents are in financial ruin. They've remortgaged their house twice to pay Natalie's debts. Your father took out a loan against his pension. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. That doesn't justify stealing my property, I replied. No, it doesn't, Uncle Frank agreed. But Natalie's in deep with some dangerous people. Loan sharks connected to organized crime. There were threats, Herman. Physical threats. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion. They should have come to me honestly, instead of stealing from me. Pride, Uncle Frank said simply. And shame. They're ashamed of how badly they've failed with Natalie, and too proud to admit they needed your help again. After hanging up, I couldn't sleep despite having been awake for nearly 48 hours straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my villa, the sunset views, the carefully chosen furnishings, the garden I'd spent weekends tending, all gone because my parents decided their favorite child's problems trumped my rights. The next morning brought news from Detective Johnson. We've identified the real estate agent who handled the transaction, Thomas Wilson from Coastal Realty. He's agreed to speak with us tomorrow. I want to be there, I insisted. That's not typically how. This is my property we're talking about. I need to hear firsthand what happened. Detective Johnson hesitated, then agreed. 9 a.m. tomorrow at the station. Don't interfere with my questioning. That night, as I lay in my downtown Los Angeles penthouse, a sleek, modern space that had never felt like home the way the villa did, I wondered if I was overreacting. Was property worth destroying family relationships over? Then I remembered all the times I'd been expected to sacrifice while Natalie was protected and coddled. All the years I'd worked myself to exhaustion to build something of my own without help from anyone. The deliberate, premeditated nature of what my parents had done. No, I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't just about property. This was about respect, boundaries, and consequences, concepts my family had never grasped when it came to me. The next morning, I met Detective Johnson at the Malibu Sheriff's Station, where Thomas Wilson was already waiting in an interview room. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his gold watch and smoothing his perfectly styled hair. Mr. Wilson, Detective Johnson began after introductions. We're investigating the sale of property at 1897 Ocean View Drive. Records show you were the listing agent. Thomas glanced between us. I was, but I'm not sure how much I can share. Client confidentiality and all that. I leaned forward. The clients you're protecting committed fraud. They sold property they didn't own. Detective Johnson shot me a warning look before turning back to Thomas. We have reason to believe this transaction involved fraudulent documentation and misrepresentation. That would nullify any confidentiality concerns. Thomas paled visibly. I had no knowledge of any fraud. The sellers presented what appeared to be valid power of attorney documents. But something felt off, didn't it? I pressed, ignoring another warning glance from the detective. A multi-million-dollar property sold in 48 hours at well below market value. Thomas hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Look, I did question the rushed timeline and the price point. The sellers, your parents, insisted it needed to be done immediately. They said you were in financial trouble and had authorized them to liquidate the property quickly. And you believed that about the owner of a $200 million tech company. Thomas looked down. I should have done more due diligence. But they had the paperwork, and the buyers were offering cash with no contingencies. Tell us about the buyers, Detective Johnson interjected. Coastal Investments, LLC. Their representative was a man named Jordan Phillips. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jordan Phillips was the founder of Rival Tech, a direct competitor who'd been trying to undermine my business for years. We'd bid against each other for contracts, poached each other's employees, and engaged in less than friendly competition, since our companies were startups. Did you tell my parents who Jordan Phillips was? I asked. Thomas shook his head. I don't think they knew. They were focused on closing quickly. There's something else you should know, Thomas continued after a pause. I tried to tell your parents the property was undervalued, significantly undervalued. What do you mean? Detective Johnson asked. Thomas pulled out his tablet and opened a property assessment app. Based on recent comparables, the villa was worth around $5,800,000 in the current market. I stared at him. $5.8 million. But they sold it for $2.5. That's not all, Thomas said, scrolling through his tablet. 2 weeks before the sale, Tech Forward made offers on 3 adjacent properties. Tech Forward was one of the largest tech companies in the world, known for building sprawling, luxurious campuses for their operations. They're planning a West Coast headquarters, I said, the pieces clicking into place. That's why Jordan wanted my property. It's not just about getting back at me, it's about the location. Thomas nodded. Tech Forward has been offering 8 to 10 million per parcel for properties in that area. The room went silent as the implications sank in. My parents hadn't just sold my property without permission. They'd sold a potential $8 million asset for less than a third of its value. Did you tell my parents this? I asked quietly. I tried to. I mentioned that waiting even a few weeks might yield a significantly higher price. They said there was no time to wait. After Thomas left, Detective Johnson turned to me. This changes things. If your parents knowingly undervalued the property to expedite the sale, that adds another layer of fraud. And if Jordan Phillips knew about the power of attorney issues, I began. Then he could be charged as an accessory, she finished. We'll need to investigate Coastal Investments thoroughly. I spent the rest of the day with my legal team strategizing our approach. By evening, we had discovered several critical facts. First, Jordan Phillips had been trying to acquire properties in that area for months, using various shell companies. Second, my company had unknowingly been in preliminary talks with Tech Forward about a collaboration that would have been housed in a new facility, potentially on exactly that stretch of coastline. Third, and most devastating, a search of my company email revealed that, before leaving for Tokyo, I had received an inquiry from Tech Forward about my interest in selling the villa. The email had been flagged by my assistant as requiring my attention upon return. Had I seen that email, I likely would have entertained their offer of $8,200,000. The villa I'd purchased for $3 million just 7 years ago had become not just a home but an extraordinarily valuable asset, one that my parents had practically given away to my business rival. We need to move quickly, Derek advised after reviewing our findings. If Jordan begins development or makes significant changes to the property, it complicates our ability to recover it. That evening, I received a call from Thomas Wilson. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, he said, his voice low, as if afraid of being overheard, but Jordan Phillips met with architectural firms today. He's planning to demolish the villa and build a modern compound that connects to the adjacent properties he's acquiring. How soon? I asked, my heart sinking. Demolition permits have already been filed. He's fast-tracking everything. After hanging up, I stood at the window of my penthouse, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. The city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about watching something I loved be destroyed out of malice and greed. I made a decision then. This wasn't just about recovering property or punishing my parents. This was about stopping Jordan Phillips from winning, from taking something precious and demolishing it for his own gain. I called Derek. I want to meet with my parents tomorrow. It's time they understood exactly what they've done. The next day, I drove to my parents' suburban Portland home, a modest 2-story where I'd grown up. Derek had advised against meeting them alone, but this was a conversation that needed to happen face-to-face without lawyers or police present. My mother answered the door, her normally perfectly styled hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. "Herman," she gasped, reaching for me. I stepped back, avoiding her embrace. "Is Dad home? And Natalie, I need to speak with all of you." She nodded, leading me into the familiar living room where family photos covered the walls, an overwhelming number, featuring Natalie's achievements with my milestones noticeably absent. My father sat in his recliner, looking older than I remembered. Natalie perched nervously on the sofa, refusing to meet my eyes. "You've got some nerve showing up here after sicking the police on us," my father began, his voice gruff with anger. "Frank, please," my mother interjected. "Let's try to resolve this as a family." I remained standing, maintaining physical distance from all of them. "I'm not here to resolve anything. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you've done." "We saved your sister's life," my father retorted. "That's what we did." I turned to Natalie. "How much did you owe? And to whom?" She stared at the carpet. $1,200,000. To various creditors. "Loan sharks," I translated. "Connected to organized crime, according to Uncle Frank." She nodded miserably. "They threatened to break my legs. Or worse." And none of you thought to come to me honestly, to explain the situation and ask for help. You've made it clear you don't approve of helping Natalie, my mother said defensively. You always want conditions and rehabilitation programs. Because writing blank checks doesn't solve addiction, I countered. It enables it. We didn't have time for your judgment, my father snapped. These weren't people who would wait for Natalie to complete some program. I took a deep breath, maintaining my composure. Do you have any idea what you actually did by selling my villa? My mother looked confused. We saved Natalie and gave you nearly $2 million. You didn't even live there full time. The property was worth nearly $6 million in the current market, I said flatly. The room went silent. My father's face paled, and my mother's hand flew to her mouth. That can't be right, my father stammered. The real estate agent said. Thomas Wilson tried to tell you the property was undervalued. You ignored him because you were in a hurry. My mother sank onto the couch. $6 million. And Tech Forward was preparing to offer over $8 million for the strategic location. I let that sink in before continuing. You sold a property worth $8 million for less than a third of its value. We didn't know, my mother whispered. But that's not the worst part, I continued. Do you know who Coastal Investments is? The company you sold to. They shook their heads. Jordan Phillips, my chief business rival who's been trying to sabotage my company for years. You handed him a strategic property that he's now planning to demolish and redevelop as part of a compound. My father's face reddened. Now wait a minute. How were we supposed to know any of this? We were trying to save your sister's life. By committing multiple felonies, I shot back. By using a fraudulent power of attorney. By selling property you had no right to sell. We're your parents, my mother pleaded. Everything we own is family property. No, it's not. I built my company and bought that villa without a penny from either of you. While you were emptying your retirement accounts to enable Natalie's addiction, I was working 80-hour weeks to create something of my own. Natalie finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. I didn't ask them to sell your house, Herman. I swear. I just told them about the threats, and they took it from there. But you didn't stop them either, I pointed out. And now you're all facing potential criminal charges for fraud and grand theft. You would send your own parents to prison, my father asked incredulously. You stole millions of dollars from me and gave it to people who wish me harm. What did you expect would happen? My mother began sobbing in earnest. We can fix this. We'll get the house back somehow. It's not that simple, I explained, my voice tight with controlled emotion. Jordan has already filed demolition permits. He's planning to tear it down within weeks. Oh God, my mother gasped. That beautiful house. Your beautiful investment, you mean, my father corrected bitterly. That's what this is really about, isn't it? The money. Always the money with you, Herman. Something snapped inside me. Yes, Dad, it's about money. The money I earned while you were teaching Natalie that other people would always bail her out. The home I created that represented everything I've accomplished despite your lack of support. The violation of having my own parents steal from me because they've never respected my boundaries. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. No, what's not fair is expecting me to keep financing Natalie's self-destruction, I replied. What's not fair is thinking you had the right to sell my property because you've run out of your own resources to enable her. Natalie stood up suddenly. They were going to ask you for more money anyway, she blurted out. Natalie, my mother exclaimed. He deserves the truth, my sister insisted. They were planning to ask you for another loan after this was all settled. They're behind on their mortgage and facing foreclosure. I stared at my parents who couldn't meet my eyes. Is this true? My father's shoulders sagged. We've got about 60 days before the bank takes the house. So this wasn't just about saving Natalie. This was about saving yourselves, too. We're family, my mother said, as if that explained everything. We're supposed to help each other. I laughed bitterly. Family. When have you ever acted like family to me? When have you ever put my needs first or even equal to Natalie's? When have you ever celebrated my achievements without immediately asking what I could do for you? The room fell silent again, the only sound my mother's quiet sobs. I felt a strange calm descend over me. For years I'd sought their approval, their support, their equal love. I'd built a business empire partly to prove my worth to them. And in one breathtakingly selfish act, they'd shown me exactly how they viewed me as a resource, to be tapped, not a son to be respected. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally. My mother's head snapped up. "You're not. Not against you and Dad," I clarified. "I'm still going after Jordan Phillips with everything I've got, and Natalie needs to face consequences for once in her life." "What does that mean?" my father asked warily. "It means I'm done enabling all of you. I'm done being the family ATM without receiving even basic respect in return. It means you'll need to find another way to save yourselves because I'm finished." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. When the real estate agent calls you about what you've done, remember this feeling. Remember what it's like to realize you've made a catastrophic mistake that can't be undone." With that, I walked out, ignoring my mother's pleas to come back and discuss further. There was nothing left to discuss. It was time to take action. The following morning, I arranged to meet Thomas Wilson at a quiet coffee shop in Santa Monica, away from his office, where Jordan Phillips might have connections. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as Thomas slid into the booth, looking nervously over his shoulder. "I know this puts you in an awkward position." "I feel partially responsible," Thomas admitted. "I should have done more due diligence on the power of attorney documents." "We all make mistakes," I replied. "The question is whether you're willing to help me fix this one." Thomas nodded cautiously. "What did you have in mind?" "I need information. Everything you know about Jordan's plans for the property, any paperwork you still have access to, and contacts at the county permit office." Over the next 2 hours, Thomas shared critical insights. Jordan was rushing the permits through using political connections. The sale documentation contained several procedural irregularities, and most importantly, Jordan had bragged to Thomas about how he'd finally gotten one over on that tech genius Herman Walsh. He knew exactly whose property he was buying, Thomas confirmed. And he seemed to know it wasn't a legitimate sale. He made a comment about how sometimes family can be your worst enemy. Armed with this information, I assembled a team of specialists. Derek as my lead attorney, Sofia Rivera, the top real estate attorney in Los Angeles, a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and a media consultant. "We're approaching this from multiple angles," I explained during our strategy session. "Legal, financial, regulatory, and public relations. Jordan thinks he's won, which makes him vulnerable." Our investigation quickly uncovered promising leads. The private investigator discovered that Jordan's development plans violated several coastal environmental regulations. The forensic accountant found that Coastal Investments had a history of questionable transactions. Sophia identified 3 procedural errors in the sale that could potentially render it void. My next move was contacting the Malibu Coastal Conservation Board, an influential group of environmentalists and wealthy homeowners dedicated to preserving the natural beauty of the coastline. "Mr. Phillips is planning to replace 3 historic properties with a modern compound that will disrupt the natural landscape and potentially damage the cliff ecosystem," I explained to the board chair, carefully omitting that one of those properties was mine. Within days, the Conservation Board had filed formal objections to the development plans. Simultaneously, an anonymous tip to the Malibu Historical Society highlighted the architectural significance of my villa, designed by a protege of Frank Lloyd Wright. The Historical Society promptly began proceedings to have the property designated as historically significant, which would severely restrict any demolition or major alterations. These actions bought time, but I knew Jordan wouldn't give up easily. I needed to confront him directly to understand his true motivations and potentially find leverage. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership between our companies, something that would seem plausible to outsiders, but that Jordan would recognize as an opportunity to gloat. We met at an upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills neutral territory where neither of us had the home field advantage. Jordan arrived 15 minutes late, a power move I'd anticipated. Tall, conventionally handsome, and dressed impeccably, he projected confidence as he slid into the chair across from me. "Herman," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's been too long. What, 3 years since that conference in San Francisco?" "4," I corrected, "when you tried to poach my head of development during his speech." Jordan laughed. "Business is business. No hard feelings, I hope." "None at all," I lied smoothly. "In fact, I wanted to discuss a potential collaboration." Our companies have been competing for so long, perhaps there's more to gain by joining forces in certain areas. Jordan's eyes narrowed, slightly suspicious of my sudden change in attitude. What specific areas did you have in mind? Well, I understand you've acquired some prime real estate in Malibu recently. Perhaps there's an opportunity for a joint development project. I watched his expression, carefully noting the momentary flash of triumph before he schooled his features back to neutral. Ah, yes. Beautiful property. Ocean views. Planning to build something spectacular there. He paused, studying me. I'm surprised you'd want to collaborate on that particular location. Why would that surprise you? I asked innocently, phone recording in my jacket pocket. Jordan smirked. Come on, Herman. We both know that was your villa. Your parents practically gave it away. So you knew it was my property when you purchased it. Of course I knew, Jordan scoffed. I've had my eye on that stretch of coastline for months. When I heard your family was offering it at a fire sale price with questionable paperwork, I couldn't believe my luck. So you were aware the power of attorney might not be valid. Jordan's smile faltered slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. The sale was completely legitimate as far as I'm concerned. Interesting. Because my sources tell me you specifically mentioned to the real estate agent that you were finally getting one over on me. Your sources are mistaken, Jordan replied, his casual demeanor slipping. And even if they weren't, the sale is final. The property is mine. I leaned forward. For now. But I wonder how Tech Forward would feel knowing you're planning to build on land obtained through fraudulent means. Their reputation for ethical business practices is well known. Jordan's expression hardened. Are you threatening me? Not at all. Just speculating about potential complications in your development plans, especially with the Coastal Commission and Historical Society now involved. By the time I left the restaurant, I had Jordan on recording, essentially admitting he knew the sale was questionable, plus valuable insights into his development timeline and financial pressures. The next phase of my plan involved Tech Forward directly. Through industry connections, I arranged a meeting with their chief strategy officer presenting market research that suggested the negative publicity from bulldozing historically significant properties could damage their brand among environmentally conscious millennials, their core customer base. There's also the matter of potential legal complications with the title I mentioned casually. I've heard one of the properties might have been sold without proper authorization. The strategy officer frowned. That's not something we were made aware of. We're partnering with Coastal Investments, but we're not directly involved in the property acquisitions. Perhaps your legal team might want to review the situation before proceeding further, I suggested. Just as due diligence. Within 48 hours, Tech Forward had paused their partnership with Jordan, pending an internal investigation. Meanwhile, my legal team filed an emergency injunction to prevent any demolition or construction, while the ownership dispute was resolved. The court date was set for the following week. The day before the hearing, Thomas Wilson contacted me with critical information. He had discovered documentation proving that Jordan had specifically sought out my property after learning I was overseas and had pressured my parents to close quickly before I returned. He has a paper trail showing he knew about the questionable power of attorney, Thomas explained. He even had his legal team prepare contingency plans in case you challenged the sale. Armed with this evidence, plus Jordan's recorded admissions and testimony from both Thomas and Detective Johnson, we entered the courtroom, confident but not complacent. The hearing lasted 3 hours, with Jordan's attorneys arguing that regardless of how the sale came about, their client was a bona fide purchaser who had paid fair market value in good faith. The turning point came when Thomas Wilson took the stand, presenting emails showing Jordan had specifically instructed his team to close before Walsh returns from Asia and had commented that the power of attorney might not hold up to scrutiny, so speed is essential. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, didn't bother leaving the courtroom to deliberate. She ruled from the bench that the sale was invalid due to fraudulent representation and ordered the property returned to my ownership immediately. Mr. Walsh will of course return the purchase price of $2,500,000 to Coastal Investments, she added. Court costs and legal fees to be determined at a later hearing. As we exited the courthouse, I spotted my parents waiting on the steps, their expressions hopeful. They had clearly expected to share in my victory, perhaps even benefit financially from the property's increased value. I walked past them without acknowledgement, their presence barely registering compared to the weight that had been lifted from my shoulders. The villa was mine again. Jordan Phillips had been defeated, and for perhaps the first time in my life I had stood firm against those who would take advantage of me, including my own family. 6 months after regaining ownership of my villa, I stood on the deck watching the sun sink below the Pacific horizon. The property looked different now. I'd renovated the west wing that had sustained water damage during the months of neglect under Jordan's ownership. I'd replaced furniture, repainted walls, and planted new gardens. But the changes went deeper than physical restoration. I'd transformed my relationship with the property itself and with my own understanding of success, family, and what truly matters. After the court victory, I'd faced a decision: keep the property or accept Tech Forward's standing offer of $8 million. The financial advisor in me knew selling was the rational choice. But sometimes life isn't about maximizing returns. Instead, I'd chosen a third path. I sold the northern 3 acres to the Malibu Coastal Conservation Trust for a modest $2 million, with the stipulation that it would remain undeveloped in perpetuity. The trust installed walking paths and native plantings, creating a buffer between my property and any future development. With $1 million of the proceeds, I established the Second Chance Recovery Foundation, focused on helping gambling addicts who couldn't afford treatment. The foundation operated on 3 core principles: accountability, support, and education. We offered scholarships to intensive treatment programs, financial counseling, and family therapy, all contingent on participants' commitment to recovery. The irony wasn't lost on me that my sister Natalie became one of the foundation's first clients. Following the court case and the public exposure of her gambling addiction, she'd hit rock bottom. With her enablers finally forced to stop rescuing her, she'd checked herself into a 6-month residential program in Arizona. Our relationship remained complicated. We spoke monthly by phone, her calls monitored by her therapist, as part of her recovery program. She was 8 months sober now, working as an administrative assistant at the treatment center and living in a halfway house with other recovering addicts. The hardest part, she'd told me during our last call, is accepting that Mom and Dad didn't actually help me by always bailing me out. They just delayed the inevitable crash. My relationship with my parents had taken a different path. After the court hearing, they'd made multiple attempts to reconnect, first with tearful apologies, then with angry accusations when those weren't accepted, and finally with manipulative health concerns that Detective Johnson confirmed were fabricated. Eventually, on the advice of my own therapist, I'd agreed to mediated family sessions. We'd met 3 times in the office of Dr. Marshall, a family systems specialist who didn't hesitate to call out toxic patterns. What I'm observing, she'd said during our second session, is that Frank and Diane struggle to view Herman as an autonomous adult with rights equal to their own. There's an expectation that his resources belong to the family collective, while his needs are considered secondary. My parents had bristled at this characterization but couldn't effectively refute it. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern too consistent. In our most recent session, my father had finally admitted, "I guess we've always seen you as the strong one who didn't need us, while Natalie was the vulnerable one who did." That became a self-fulfilling prophecy, I'd replied. I became strong because I had to. Natalie remained vulnerable because you never expected anything else. We were slowly establishing new boundaries. I'd made it clear that any relationship moving forward would be based on mutual respect, not financial support. They were facing the consequences of their actions, bankruptcy, and the loss of their home without my intervention. It was painful to watch, but necessary for all of us. The legal aftermath had been complex. Jordan Phillips faced civil penalties for his role in the fraudulent purchase, but avoided criminal charges by cooperating with authorities. Tech Forward had abandoned their plans for that stretch of coastline after the negative publicity, instead purchasing property further north along the coast. My parents had narrowly avoided criminal prosecution when I declined to press charges, but the civil fraud case had forced them into bankruptcy. They'd moved into a small apartment and were slowly rebuilding their lives on a fixed income from my father's reduced pension. Professionally, Next Gen Solutions continued to thrive. Our expansion into Asian markets had been successful with new offices in Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore. I'd promoted my longtime COO, Derek's wife, Sarah, to co-CEO, allowing me to step back from day-to-day operations and focus more on strategic direction and personal balance. The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Thomas Wilson. After the court case, he'd left Coastal Realty to start his own boutique firm focused on ethical real estate practices. We'd stayed in touch, and I'd eventually hired him to handle the conservation trust transaction. His integrity during the villa crisis had impressed me, and we developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Through Thomas, I'd met Amanda Chen, an environmental lawyer who'd worked on the conservation easement. Brilliant, principled, and refreshingly direct, Amanda had initially been skeptical of my motives for the land donation. Our first dinner had been more debate than date, but something about her challenge to my worldview had been invigorating. 6 months later, we were cautiously building a relationship based on shared interests and values, rather than need or convenience. Unlike previous relationships where I'd used financial success as a shortcut to connection with Amanda, I was learning to be vulnerable, to share the parts of myself that had nothing to do with business achievements. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, I reflected on what I'd learned through this ordeal. The villa had become a symbol of something I hadn't fully understood until I nearly lost it: the importance of boundaries. Not just physical boundaries between properties, but emotional and psychological boundaries between people, even family members. My parents had violated those boundaries out of a lifetime habit of seeing me as a resource rather than a person. Jordan had attempted to exploit that vulnerability for profit and revenge. Both had failed, because I'd finally learned to stand firm in my own worth. The greatest lesson, though, wasn't about protecting what was mine. It was about understanding what truly belonged to me in the first place. Not just property or possessions, but my time, my energy, my right to make decisions about my own life. No one, not even family, had the right to take those without consent. I'd also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing harmful patterns to continue. It means releasing the expectation that people will be different than they are, while still protecting yourself from future harm. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda, still on for dinner, bringing that documentary about ocean conservation I mentioned. I smiled, texting back a simple, "looking forward to it." The villa lights illuminated automatically as I entered, sensing my presence. The space felt different now, no longer just a symbol of success, but a sanctuary I'd fought for and reclaimed. A place where new memories could be built on my terms with people who respected boundaries and valued connection over convenience. I'd lost a certain innocence about family in this battle, but I'd gained something more valuable: the clarity to recognize which relationships nourished me and which depleted me, and the courage to nurture the former while releasing the latter. That might be the most important thing I'd learned. Sometimes what we think is the end of a story is actually just the beginning of a better one. Before I wrap up this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who crossed your boundaries? What did you do, and how did it change your relationships? Drop a comment below to share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and rebuilding after betrayal. And if you know someone struggling with family dynamics, share this video. It might help them find the courage to stand up for themselves too. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into.